when I'm talking to a potential guest and I don't know exactly like what their expertise is or how they can help the audience, I ask them. I'm like, hey, Meredith, so our audience is small marketing teams at B2B technology companies who are trying to do a lot with a little. What would, if you were to impart to that audience the number one thing that you think you could help them with, what would it be? And then you say something to me and I'm like, okay, great. Tell me more about that. All right, let's build the episode around this thing that you're good at instead of tell me about your background.
Every B2B marketing team faces challenges when they have to do more with less. Should you build skills internally? Should you find a freelancer? Should you search for the right agency? This is Tech Qualified, a podcast for the scrappy B2B marketing teams. In each episode, Meredith Metsker, a senior content leader at a tech company, and Justin Brown, a marketing agency owner, uncover how marketing teams generate qualified opportunities with limited resources. Every episode helps you get one step closer to winning over your ideal customers.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tech Qualified. I'm Meredith Metsker, and I am joined by my co-host, Justin Brown.
Hello.
This show is brought to you by New North. New North specializes in working with B2B marketers who have to do more with less. When you partner with New North, you turn your small, scrappy marketing team into a growth engine. So, Justin, I know we've got a super cool topic on deck today about how episodic content can give small marketing teams a strategic advantage. Now, I know we both have a lot of experience with this kind of content, me from an in-house perspective, and then you from the agency perspective, working with tons of small marketing teams who are trying to do exactly this. Mm-hmm. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. I think first to just give us some context to start with, can you just explain like a little bit about what episodic content means to you?
Yeah, for sure. And what I'm actually going to do is I know I look at things a lot of times through the agency lens, but to get started, I'm actually going to just talk about it from my own experience as a business owner and someone who was essentially a small marketing team, being that we really didn't have one. My business partner, Tristan, and I, before Motion became, and Motion is our podcasting agency, before Motion became a podcasting agency, we were a video agency. And that had us heads down in project-based work all the time. It was incredibly challenging to not only be able to execute on projects at all times. We had new projects coming in. You had to understand them. I mean, these are marketing projects. And then to then have the time, energy, what have you, to be able to create content on an ongoing basis. And we would create content here and there sporadically. And in many cases, I mean, I like to think that the content that we would create for ourselves was very good. I mean, I remember we did this educational series. It was like a 10-part series where we brought in talent. We wrote all the scripts. It was for how you could use video within your marketing efforts. But then like after we did that, I mean, it was like a 2-day shoot. It was awesome. We layered in graphics. We had written content to accompany it. But then it just, I mean, it didn't die. I mean, it existed on the site, but like we weren't doing anything else. Then it was like, oh man, we got to get some blogs out. We got to get some content going and the push and pull. And while I'm a business owner, I know marketers deal with this as well, especially when you're on small teams. You have sales asking for things. You have the CEO has a presentation. You have to coordinate this event. You need to get, now because we're coordinating this event, we all of a sudden need a backdrop. We didn't have a backdrop. Who's going to get us the backdrop? Well, I guess marketing. And so marketing is getting asked to do all of these different things, and then also having an ongoing content engine that's running. And it wasn't until 2018, 2019, Tristan came to me and was like, hey, you know, I've been listening to a lot of business podcasts. It seems like a fun medium. What do you think? And I was like, yeah, I mean, sure. Sounds good. Like, let's podcast. And so we start podcasting, and it was the first time, and it just like clicked for us immediately. We were like, wow, not only are we having great conversations. Like all of a sudden, I'm a video person, and at this stage, we're like trying to get into other things. We know we have more to offer than just being video agency, but we're like, for the first time ever, like every CMO is saying they'll talk to us. Like that in and of itself is
that
awesome.
means something.
Yeah, we're like running this podcast, and we're asking, heads of marketing if they'll come on to the show, and our response rate and yes rate is like 25%. We're like, well, this is crazy. And this was before like the big podcast boom of the pandemic. So I don't think response rates are like they were, but we were doing just cold outreach to people, and everyone's like, yeah, sure, I'll be on this podcast. We're like, this is awesome. But it really gave us the first time where we were able to produce content on an ongoing basis without having to like break the mental piggy bank of work that you had to put into it. I'm not saying a podcast isn't work. Trust me, I see it all the time. I see there's a graveyard of business podcasts out there since the pandemic, but it was the way for a small team like us, where I have a full-time job, Tristan has a full-time job, which was running our agency, but we also needed content. We didn't really have it. And being a marketing agency of sorts, you're not really going to, like, we could have gone and gotten an agency, but we're not going to go get an agency. We're going to be like, we can do this stuff. We just needed to figure out how. And this was the first time that we were able to have ongoing content coming out of our company that we felt was impactful, mattered. It started to help us rank even better on, in SEO without having like an SEO firm come in. We're just watching our name. We're not like doing too much tactically, but we're just seeing our name rise up, the ranks of, and then we pivoted into being a podcast agency and overtook, the top spot in B2B podcasts, and that's just from us going out there and just doing the work, but not having to recreate the wheel each time. So, that's kind of my story of how I realized that the impact that episodic content could have on a small team.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking throughout your whole answer is episodic content is a great way for a small team to make an outsized impact. Like that's how it is for for my team at UConnect too. Like even at a conference we hosted last year, we asked one of the attendees, we said, based on all of the content, all of the things you see coming out of UConnect with our podcast, our newsletter, our social media posts, our blogs, how many people do you think work on our marketing team? And they said 10. At the time, there was 2 of us. And it was mostly me on content. So like I think it not only gives you that ongoing content like you were talking about, but it builds the habit, which is so important, especially when you're on a small team, you have limited resources. Like you just have to make it part of your process. And then, like you said, it's not reinventing the wheel every time. It's still work, but it's less of a mental load of doing this new things every single time.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's so fitting of a thing for a small marketing team. I'm not here to say if you're a 20-person marketing team that podcasting or episodic content is right for you. That's a decision that you'll make. And that's not really the audience that I speak to. Our clients are typically small marketing teams that need to do a lot with a little. And that's where the episodic content for me is, yes, if you have a writing team and you have a video team and you have a design team and you're a 25-person company or a 25-person marketing team, then I could see where you're like, well, a podcast is actually more work. Like we're doing all of these things already. And then you're telling me to do another thing that I'm held accountable like every other week when we already have an engine running. I don't disagree with that. Where I think it fits well is for people who don't have the ability to get content out. The amount of people I talk to that say things like, I know I should be creating content, but I'm not because I don't have the time. Or I sent our subject matter experts within the organization some topics. I'm waiting for them to write some blog posts about it so that I can get that back and post it to the blog. And I'm like, why don't you just interview them? Why don't you just talk to them for 60 minutes? Mm-hmm. They don't need to like have that same mental load that comes with writing, and then you can then execute on that. And those are the kinds of things that I think help people a lot. And so, and I'll be interested to hear what else you have to ask, because I do feel that it does a lot more than just the content piece as well. But if we just start there in the most simplistic fashion, it gives you the ability to have fresh content coming out of your organization on an ongoing basis. Like, full stop right there. That to me makes it worth it for a small team. And that's what we noticed right away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So kind of on that note, what do you think are some of the other benefits besides those of investing in episodic content for a small marketing team?
Yeah. So having content going out on an ongoing basis is huge. And then there's other things that it does as well. I mean, if we start as simple as social, giving your brand just some life and energy and having new content to post on social, if you're doing a podcast every other week, you can have maybe 5 to 10 assets come out of each episode. That is then 5 to 10 social media posts per episode. That's like 20 social media, 10 to 20 social media posts that you could write and have an accompanying asset each month. That in and of itself can fuel a very simple social strategy where your brand looks alive. When people go to your LinkedIn page, I'm talking about your company LinkedIn page, they see a lively brand that is engaging with people who look, sound, act like they do, and they being your ideal customer, right? Like, your ideal customer comes to your social page because they're maybe thinking about reaching out or submitting a contact form, and they're like, oh, that's Susie. I used to work with Susie at XYZ Co. And that is immediately something that will trigger them to say, hey, this brand is trustworthy. I have a lot of conversations with people who are European brands trying to come to break into the U.S. market. And this is a big recommendation that I make to them, is to launch a podcast where they interview American people, because I hear some of the issues that I hear are Americans won't trust our brand because we're European, and we don't have any American case studies because nobody will work with us because we're a European company. And I'm like, well, why don't you just associate yourself with these people? Start putting it on your social media. I saw, for example, I was looking at the social media of this company that wants to break into the US market. Like, everything's in German. And I'm like, I'm not saying that it doesn't have to be in German, but maybe you do some posts where you interview some people in English, and then you also have some, they can hear from people who are more like them. And so just the ability to fuel your social channels with people in the space that you're trying to sell to, that you're trying to talk to, that you're trying to get to notice you, that's one. Then the ability to, we have a client right now, I don't know how many people he's ever actually spoken to, small software company with not many customers. And he was very resistant to podcasting in general. Nervous, I think. It's a big endeavor. People who have just never been out there before. Meredith, I don't know when you kind of decided you were going to be out there in like the LinkedIn world, but like when you're not, it's scary to post into the void, to feel like you're talking into the void. He would say things like, I don't know who's even going to care about this show, why anybody would even want to come on it. We're like, look, just let us try. Just let's see what happens. And this guy, like, in 2 months has changed. I've seen more work get done between our marketing agency and his company than ever before. We literally did a training on it yesterday. We worked with, I surprised one of the strategists. We have a weekly training. And I was like, you just got to tell, like, we don't have a big topic for today, but Mia, can you just tell the story of how you got this client to go from like, I'm so nervous to do anything, to like 7 podcasts booked in the last 2 weeks? And it's because he's reaching out to people in his space. He has not historically had a lot of engagement with his brand. He's not having a lot of conversations. And we've been begging him to do this for a long time. And now he's just out there talking to people, engaging with people. I'm not saying he's trying to pull like I saw things a while back, like account-based podcasting, basically, where you bring as many people on as you can to then try and like at the end be like, so you want to buy from me? It's not that, but it is. I mean, these are ideal prospective customers for him. And he's getting to have conversations with them. He's getting to talk to them about his expertise, their expertise, aligning his brand alongside them, having nice touch points. And he's got like completely invigorated by this, that he's having more conversations with people in the space than ever before. And that's how I felt. I was like, oh my gosh, CMOs will talk to me. Like I used to, when people are sending out their requests to video agencies, it's like I get the bottom rung marketer with no budget, no authority. They're like, my manager wants me evaluating video agencies. How much do you cost? And I'm like, can I talk? Like, I want to just like, can I talk to the CMO or the VP of marketing about some of the ideas that they have? Nope, you can't. And all of a sudden, it's like I can talk to anybody I wanted. That was a fascinating change for me to then also get to, I got a lot of ways this helps. Then also, so then you get to these CMOs, right? You get these conversations with these people. So let's talk about your company's messaging. I then get to hear from these folks and how they talk and how they speak and what their pains are and where they're struggling and what problems they have. We built an entire business unit, the podcasting business unit, around the conversations that we're having with CMOs saying, we struggle to get content out regularly. We struggle to do this. We struggle to do that. I'm like, I've actually not been struggling with that. What if we make this an actual service and we say, this is how you can build the content engine that will fuel your small marketing team? I didn't come up with that overnight. It was literally through conversations with the ideal customer profile of people I'm trying to talk to. And then we built all of our messaging, not out of me and my business partner sitting in a room saying like, hey, what do you think they care about? Like, let's do some empathy maps. Let's talk about it. Let's just go back and forth, you and me, with ideas that we have. No, let's go hear from them. I want to hear from the people who will be the end user, the buyer. I want to hear from them. And then I want to take their words and put them as the messaging of how we help. Instead of this like, get 10 people in a room, let's all talk about the way that we think that we help our ICP, and then that'll be the new tagline on our business, and everyone from the outside looks at it and it looks like a Frankenstein. I'm like, what is this even saying?
Mm-hmm.
You want me to keep going? Or you got... I've got
no, I
more.
mean, I think... I know you do for sure. I think that's really interesting because it's just like there's so many benefits. And it's not just the ongoing consistent content. It's the connection you're building with your audience, like whether that's through the conversations you have to produce the episodic content, or as you were saying, the way you distribute it, like on your social pages or a newsletter or however you do that. Like you are building the audience with the people you talk to. You are showing your personality. You're putting a face to your company's name consistently, which I think makes a huge difference. Like I know we've talked about this before, but people don't want to buy from some faceless organization that has no personality. Like that's not how it works. We relate to stories. We relate to other people. And episodic content is a great way to just do that on a consistent basis.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that kind of goes back to the thing that I was saying about the European companies trying to break into the US. I'm like, make yourself a person to these people you're trying to sell to. Like, they just go to your site. You're sending cold emails. They go to your site. They see you're in Sweden or they see you're in Germany. And immediately, fair or not, the American market is like, nah, I don't think that's for me. But if they go to your social channels and they see their peers, they see people that they know, they recognize it, they see humans that like, oh, cool. So like these people are really doing some interesting things. Wow, they're breaking into the US. They must be growing. People must know about them. That's actually interesting now. They're not only, now they're an international corporation. Like that's pretty cool versus, this faceless brand, like you said, that just, people don't know what they're buying. And if they haven't heard of you, they have no way to put you alongside something that they trust and see people that they know. It's going to be very hard to make those kinds of, to get those people into your, into your pipeline. And this is just a great way to build trust throughout your space.
Mm-hmm. I think that's especially true if you have a lot of competitors who, how are you supposed to differentiate yourself? Of course, you can differentiate your product, your service, your customer support, but your brand, your personality, like that also makes a big difference. We see it play out all the time.
Yep.
Okay. So I think, if someone is listening to this episode, they are bought in on the idea of creating episodic content. They see the benefits. What do you think are like the first steps in developing an episodic content strategy for a small team?
Yeah. So typically what we do, and it's funny, I do have people who come to us and they want to launch a podcast or a video series, and they're very prospect focused. And that does, it's not, it's a benefit, but it's not typically where I land. The first thing that I do is I try to identify who the audience is going to be. Like, who is this for? The more narrow, the better. And I'm just looking for something right now. Let's see if I can pull it up. We actually made this piece of content, and I did find it, that was basically how to build a podcast plan. So I'll actually read it out. I mean, these were the pieces that we thought would be a good approach for what to think about when going to launch a show. And the big thing here, I mean, I'm not talking necessarily, and I think I do have questions in here about how the content gets created, right? Like, are you gonna record in Riverside? Are you gonna, edit in Descript? What are you gonna use tool-wise? Who's your resources gonna be? But I'm gonna talk a little bit more like, hey, we're just ideating this plan. So here are the questions that I would ask is, first off, what's the name of the show? I mean, that's for fun. That's the first question I have. That's not actually like the biggest piece of it, but it is. I do believe in naming it, even if you don't plan on having this series be a podcast, and it is something that just fuels like a YouTube channel or an overarching strategy. Having a name for the show is huge when doing guest outreach. We have clients who are like, look, we just want to use this interview-based episodic content. It's not so much episodic as it's more like just that's the approach we're taking, is doing recordings on an ongoing basis and then using that to generate the same assets, videos, long form blog posts out of, using the transcript as kind of the framework. But I always try to defer to a named show, because when you're doing your outreach, it's a lot better to say, hey, this is, and I'll use the name of the show that I was referencing earlier, but like, this is Data Alchemy. I was wondering if you want to come on. It's just a cool name.
Yeah.
Versus like, hey, do you want to come on XYZ's? Do you want to come and collaborate on some content with XYZ Co? Like, I mean, maybe. I'll see what my schedule is. Or do you want to come and make an appearance on Data Alchemy, tech qualified, recorded content? Sorry, what's the Uconnect show? It's slipping my mind right now.
It's Career Everywhere.
Career Everywhere. Like these just quick hitter names. It just feels real. There's a theory, I forget what it's called, but it's that if someone is on TV, you trust them. Like inherently. They could be anybody, but you just naturally, it's like if you, and probably less now than like 20 years ago when the idea came up. But like 20 years ago, it was like, well, if you're on TV, you're clearly someone I should listen to. You wouldn't have made it on TV if that wasn't the case. And so by having a name of a show, it is like, it gives you some sort of authority. So we try to name all of our shows. Some people are like, look, we don't want to do that, and that's fine. Okay, but the next questions are, the big pieces is, who's your ideal listener or your audience? Are they prospects, customers, partners, influencers? Who are they? Who do you want listening? Now, this constantly gets confused when I'm going through a launch process with someone. They immediately think, when I say listener, I'm saying guest. I don't know why. It's like the human brain immediately is like, so who am I going to have on the show? I'm like, no. They can be different. I'm talking about who is going to hit play, whether that is on LinkedIn playing a short video, whether it's reading a post, whether it's listening to the full episode on YouTube or Spotify. Who is hitting play on this episode? And typically, that's going to be your ideal customer, would be my guess. That's who you want listening to what you're doing. The next thing is, how does your show help that audience? And I'll be curious to get your take on this, Meredith. But like, one of the things that I desperately try to get people to steer away from is, and again, it goes back to guest. Everyone like is so guest focused when I first start talking to them.
Yep.
I'm like, no, you're not just like interview with Meredith. And it would be interesting to see our first interview that we did together, Meredith, on recorded content, which is the show I used to do. I believe it was like, how to use conflict and an inverted pyramid style approach in journalism to take to your podcast. It was not that many words. I promise it was a better title than that. But the idea was, it was a show to help people. Like, that show was a show to help B2B marketers on small teams that are interested in podcasting. That was what the show was about. It was not, I'm going to have B2B marketers who do podcasts on the show. And then today's episode is interviewing Meredith. Like, that is not, it is not you, and I hear this a lot too, it is not, in my opinion, you going out for a coffee or a beer and recording a conversation with you and someone in the space. People will stop listening to that after 2 episodes. I mean, I'm not learning anything. I mean, it's cool that, like, Meredith got her start at this company, and then she ran content there, and then she left, and now she's at UConnect, and now she's doing this, and then thanks, Meredith, it was great talking to you. No, like, tackle a problem. Like, how is this show actually helping your audience? So I'm just curious, Meredith, some of your input on that, because I know you have a good opinion on it.
Yeah. I was just thinking, like, I think that really applies to, I mean, most podcasts, but especially like company business related podcasts, which I know is our primary audience here. But I was just thinking, like, there are some podcasts where it literally is about the person being interviewed. Like, Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard comes to mind. Like, it's just about the people he's talking to. But I know for us at UConnect, as we were thinking through this process that you're laying out, like, we knew our ideal audience was career services leaders in higher education. And we, at that point, knew quite a bit about them. So we're thinking, we know they love to learn from each other, like peers at other institutions, but there's not really a good way for them to do that outside of in-person conferences that only happen, a couple times a year, assuming they have the budget to go. And so we wanted to create a way for them to share knowledge with each other in an easy, low-budget kind of way. And of course, that puts UConnect at the center of that and makes us that kind of the natural connector of career leaders, gave us some credibility in the space, really put our name and our brand out there consistently, and of course keeps us top of mind when, these career leaders realize that they have an issue and we can help solve it. And our episodes purposely are not salesy about UConnect at all. Like, UConnect does come up because we do interview customers a lot, and they naturally will bring it up, which is great because I think that's more effective than me, pitching UConnect on every podcast. Like, no one wants to listen to that.
Some of my favorite testimonials that I send to people, I'm like, don't listen to a testimonial that's clearly canned. Like, I talked to a customer, you can see how we worked with them. Like, you'll hear all about, they're not here to pitch you on us. It's just a true unfiltered conversation with our brand. So anyway, I just always think those are interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I always say, like, there's a reason I'm not a salesperson. Like, I'm not into that. I like having sort of this more natural conversations. And yeah, so far we've been doing the podcast for a little over a year now, and it's been really effective. It continues to grow. We get more downloads every month. People are excited to be on the show. Like, it feels like something that's an honor because they have seen their other peers on the show as well. Like, it's become an established, piece of episodic content in the space, and it has served us well. Like, we've had some inbound leads come in where they cite the podcast as how they heard about us, which is music to my ears.
Yeah. And I want to touch actually on something that you mentioned about Armchair Expert. I think that, and I talk to people about this a lot. So, like, let's use me being a guest on a show. Let's say I get asked to go make an appearance on a show, and they just want to ask me about myself, my background, etc. On Armchair Expert, the interview, let's just say Adam Sandler. And Adam Sandler, people want to hear anything he has to say. So if Dax Shepard interviews Adam Sandler and they shoot the shit for an hour about who cares what, people will listen because Adam Sandler inherently is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
He is
has
famous.
The brand.
he is famous. He is funny. He does all sorts of things. He's well connected. People will sit on every word that Adam Sandler has to say. Not to take anything away from myself, but I'm not Adam Sandler. People will not tune in to just hear me talk about my life and what I had for breakfast and what it was like, why I wear big baggy shorts and play basketball with my buddies even though I'm 50. Like, Adam Sandler can pull that off. Nobody cares about that from me. And it's important to recognize that. People are, and this goes back to the ideal listener, Adam Sandler on Armchair Expert could replace if I wanted to watch The Sopranos tonight. Justin making an appearance talking about B2B marketing is probably going to fall more in a bucket of where people want to learn. And I'm not replacing someone's desire to watch The Sopranos or Game of Thrones, where Armchair Expert is more entertainment on that level. I'm more on there when they want to learn something. And so when they tune in to hear me talk, this is your ideal listener, they're going to want to walk away feeling like they've gained something. If they listen to Justin talk about his background, Meredith talk about her background, the next B2B marketer talk about their background, and we do the song and dance 4 or 5 times, people are going to say, I've spent 5 hours listening to them interview people, and I just really haven't walked away with something tangible where I'm like, I really learned something today. And so this again goes back to having your listeners or your audience is the number one thing that you're focused on. How are we helping them? How is this podcast helping them? And that to me is the big difference between an entertainment podcast where, yes, is it funny when Jerry Seinfeld drives a car to coffee with another funny person and they talk about nothing and we'll watch it? We're not that. Now, your show, I'm not telling you not to be funny, entertaining, engaging, all those things. Definitely try to be those. Be yourself, what have you, but it's typically not why someone is hitting play on a B2B podcast. And it is our job as hosts and the people running the show to make sure that we don't have the listener feel like you're wasting their time. You mentioned your show increasing incrementally, Meredith. My guess is it comes from your journalistic background, where you are trying to provide problems and solutions to people on these episodes. The way that you slowly and organically build a podcast is these podcasts don't take off. We're not without paid media or anything. You just put a podcast out there, organic growth, post a little bit on social media. The way that you get it to grow over time is that you get listeners, you retain them, they continue listening, and then you get more without those ones that you got falling off. And the way that you do that and that you get people to listen to not 2 episodes or 3 episodes, but 10, 20, 50 episodes is that every time that they show up and they're like, I want to learn something today, and I know if I listen to this podcast, I'm going to walk away better at my role. I will have learned something. I'll have taken something away. And that is why I try to steer away from interview with X person, because then it's really a crapshoot. It may happen. I believe that if I said, Meredith, I'm just going to do an interview with you, that you'd have a nugget that people would take away and walk away with. That's why I wanted to do this show with you. But it won't always be that way. I've interviewed people who have very little to say and they don't do a lot of appearances and they're not usually behind a microphone and they're super nervous and they might have all the wisdom in the world. But if you're not setting them up to be successful, they're just going to answer your questions. So if you're like, tell me about your last job. They're like, well, I worked at Uconnect for 2 years. Silence. Okay, well, so when you were there, what did you work on? Well, I was a content manager, and I also worked on some demand gen campaigns. Silence. Okay, so moving on to the next question. And I haven't set them up to be able to be successful. I didn't ask them maybe beforehand, this is one of my favorite questions to ask people is here. So I'm talking to a potential guest, and I'd be curious how you do this as well, Meredith. When I'm talking to a potential guest and I don't know exactly what their expertise is or how they can help the audience, I ask them. I'm like, hey, Meredith, so our audience is small marketing teams at B2B technology companies who are trying to do a lot with a little. If you were to impart to that audience the number one thing that you think you could help them with, what would it be? And then you say something to me and I'm like, okay, great. Tell me more about that. All right, let's build the episode around this thing that you're good at instead of tell me about your background. How do you get content ideas out of guests? Because I know you take, an approach that isn't just I'm interviewing this person. It is trying to have these problems and solutions? What are some of the ways that you kind of suss that out of people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's kind of funny because when I first started hosting and producing a podcast at my last company, I kind of started that way where I didn't really have a topic going in. I was just talking to this person about their work, what they do, why they do it. And it was like the interviews were fine because, like, not to toot my own horn, I'm a decent interviewer at this point. I have a lot of experience in it, but I didn't have the topic. And it made it very difficult in post-production to come up with an episode title, to figure out how to promote it, to write the summary, like, because there was no focus. So, ever since then, I have figured out I need to know that right away going in. I need to know exactly what the topic is. I need to have an idea of the title of the episode, and I need to communicate that with the guest. So my process now at UConnect is, I'll reach out to a career leader at a college or university, and sometimes I might have an idea of what they could talk about because I was introduced to this person by one of our customer success managers who works with them. They're like, hey, they're doing this really cool, innovative program. You should ask them about that. So sometimes I know going in, but other times when I ask them if they're interested in being on the show, of course, I send them to a Calendly page where they can schedule. And in that scheduling form, there's a place for them to write, like, what do you have expertise in? What do you specialize in? What can you share with your peers? What do you think they want to hear about? And so I will also source those ideas from the guests themselves, which has always worked really well because who knows the audience better than the audience themselves, right? So that's kind of how I have done that. And then I typically do a prep call with every guest before the interview where we talk through some of the ideas they had or the idea I had. And we zero in on what topic we want to focus on. We agree on it, and then we're off to the races. And I personally send questions ahead of time. I know not everybody does, and there's different viewpoints on that. But for this particular audience, I think they appreciate the opportunity to prepare because a lot of them have not been on podcasts before. So I try to take that into account.
Yeah, and I started that way as well. I mean, I probably did 200 interviews with CMOs and heads of marketing and asked them the same, like, 15 boilerplate questions that I have. How are sales and marketing interacting at your company? What are your views on MQLs? Whatever it may be. And I was like, I can't do it anymore. I was so... And that was actually this show. That was Tech Qualified in its early days. Tech Qualified has existed since this was our first podcast. We shut it down. And it's what led to Tech Qualified getting shut down. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep asking the same questions. Some interviews are great. Some are complete duds. I'm just tired of saying, hi, marketer, tell me about your story. What are you doing? And I will say, I had people who reached out and said they missed the show, which was nice. I was like, okay, so at least I wasn't like interviewing people into the void that no one cared about. People did like that. But I felt there was a better way where those good episodes where I was like, wow, that was awesome. And it happened completely on its own because maybe the guest was good. Maybe I had a big enough cup of coffee that day, but it wasn't a repeatable process. Whereas when I have had really good topic, it's like you take the guesswork out of it. Another thing that does, in my opinion, it took a lot of the anxiety away of heading into an episode. When I know I have a rock solid topic that's going to help my audience, I'm like, the person that I'm interviewing, because I was never really worried about myself heading in. It was always, I was worried when I'm heading in with these kind of boilerplate questions, I was always worried whether the responses were going to be any good. You're really putting a lot of pressure onto the guest dancing well versus you really conducting the music. And I found that when I brought really good topic, had good questions, I'm like, hey, look, even if they're short in their answers, even if, they don't elaborate much or they don't have the best answers, my questions are good and someone is going to hit play and they're going to feel like this was a good use of their time. Whereas I know for a fact I had interviews when I was doing boilerplate stuff with no major topic and it was interviewing this person. I know I had episodes that were duds. I mean, I did. And there were more of them than I probably would have liked. And it's what led to me saying, I got to take a new approach on this. And then I wanted to start with For a long time I did. My first question was always a problem. There's a problem with X. What do you think about that? How are you seeing that? And it's like, boom, grab them right away. Audience is like, oh, I have that problem. I want to hear how this person answers that they have this problem. So,
Yeah. The metaphor that came to mind was like, when you're not prepared, you don't come in with this topic that you both agree upon. You're like rowing in different directions. Your boat's going to go in a little circle. Whereas if you're both rowing in the same direction, it's going to be so much stronger and much more effective.
yep. So
Okay.
let me just get through these topics.
Oh, that's right. You had more questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, I'm just going to move through them pretty quickly, though, instead of elaborating on all of them, because then we'll be here all day. All right. So here are the questions that I have on this workbook that I have pulled up. And if anybody follows me on LinkedIn and you want access to this workbook, just reach out. It has a bunch of additional resources in it as well. It's a PDF. You can write in the answers to it if you're trying to get a podcast approved. We actually built it for people who are trying to get podcasts approved by their CEOs. And the CEO would be like, well, what's the show about? And they'd be like, well, that's why we want to work with Justin. And then they'd be like, well, I'm not going to do it until you have a plan. So I basically built this editable workbook for it. So if you want it, reach out. But here are the questions in it. What's the name of the show? Who's your ideal listener or audience? How does your show help that audience? What is the theme statement or your description of the show? What is the format of the show? Is it interview-based? Is it going to be a solo cast? Are you going to do roundtable? Is it going to be like narrative style? Who are going to be the host or hosts? Who will, and you see how I have this last, who will be your ideal guests? Then how do your guests relate to your audience? What types of topics will you tackle on the show? What type of brand guidelines or design elements are going to be incorporated in the show? What are the deliverables required from each episode? Where will this show live on your company's website? How many more of these do I have? A bunch. All right, that's probably good for now. If you want the workbook, there's more in there. I'm happy to give it to whomever is interested. But yeah, I mean, I think having a solid plan heading in is going to be huge for getting these types of things approved. But I can also tell you, like you said, Meredith, people saying, oh, we think you're a marketing team of 10. I've heard on so many occasions, this having a podcast helps us punch above our weight class as a marketing team. I mean, we just watched one of our clients who's the small dog in their industry, and there is a big dog in their industry. And when we started the podcast, and for 2 to 3 years, they were a team of 2 marketers. And one of the marketers was the head of sales and marketing. I mean, he's the head sales guy too. So like 1.5 marketers, probably more like 1. And they're the big dog in the industry with a marketing team of 25 is essentially copying everything that they're doing from like content period at their organization. And that to me is like such a great implication on the power of the podcast, is that this small team was like, what can we do to compete with the big dog? Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to launch this podcast. We're going to establish some thought leadership, whatever. And the big dog is chasing the small dog. And he's saying, wow, you guys are running laps around us. We need to do what you're doing. And that can be the power of the podcast. Punching above my weight class, really just being able to execute on so much more than we ever thought we could. I hear those things all the time, and it's why I did it. I mean, I get it. People say that to me. It's not a surprise. I'm like, I know. I was in the same boat. We could never get content produced on an ongoing basis. And then we found this medium, and now, we've established ourselves as thought leaders within the space. People know us for it. I get tagged on LinkedIn. People are like, hey, I'm thinking about doing a podcast or a video series. Like, here, you should talk to Justin. I mean, that happened from those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just thinking like back to something we were talking about earlier, where it's like episodic content helps you connect with your audience on a deeper level. And I have seen that to be true at UConnect. Like, as the host of the podcast, I'm the author of our newsletter. I am the manager of our community. And it has really helped me build a relationship with the audience enough to where, like, just this morning I sent out a newsletter, and I always personalize the intro. And I mentioned how I'm going to be on vacation the next couple weeks, and I'll be in New Orleans for part of that. And some of our customers from Tulane University in New Orleans responded to the email, and they're like, hey, we would love to show you around campus if you have time. Like, let us know how we can help. We hope you have a good time in our city. And like, that's just so cool. Like, that would never have happened if we hadn't invested in this episodic content and kind of just put us out there a little bit. And it makes it so much easier for me as a content marketer in other aspects because I have the trust of the audience. So if I want to reach out to somebody for a testimonial, for a quote for an article, for a podcast appearance, for an example for the newsletter, like people are so much more willing because they know me and they trust me. And I think that's a very underrated part of the episodic content strategy.
All right, I got a question for you.
Okay.
Favorite New Orleans-based food? I love New Orleans.
I've never been there before.
Oh, you're in for a treat.
I'm like drooling over the idea of eating beignets every day.
Oh,
so.
You're gonna have. I had a big sales meeting on Monday. I actually wore my. I was in a. I know. See, but it's okay at the end of the episode. We've already given the audience so many good nuggets.
Now we can talk about food.
Yeah. I went to a big sales meeting on Monday, and I was in a wedding in New Orleans about 1.5 or 2 years ago, and the groomsman gift was beignet, like all over print socks. So I wore those to my meeting on Monday. But yeah, po' boys, beignets, you're
Gumbo.
in for a treat. It's gonna be great. The gumbo shop, that's my spot that I go to. If you can find it, that's where I get my gumbo. So that's where we'll end today's episode, I think.
Yeah.
Nice
On that
plug.
note, yeah. We started with episodic content. We ended with gumbo.
Yep.
Typical. All right. Well, on that note, is there anything else you want to add, Justin, before I close this out?
Yeah, there was just one other thing. So I just wanted to talk about a couple of the other ways. I'm not going to get into it in detail, but just other ways that I'm seeing episodic content be used. One of the things that if you go to motionagency.io and you check out some of our blog posts there, we have long form blog posts all over the place. And one of the things that we do is we use a ton of media in our blog posts, whether that is, hey, check out it's a, embedded quote or something. And it's like, hey, you can learn more about this from this conversation I had with so-and-so, and then putting in quote cards from podcast episodes, videos. You all of a sudden can turn your blog posts into like multimedia posts that you do that have so many other pieces to them. So it's not just when you think about these repurposed assets of like short videos and clips and things, they don't only need to be used on social media. They can be used as multimedia pieces within other written content that you have or other places on your site or on your homepage or what have you. They can be used within paid media campaigns, trying to drive people top of funnel kind of engagement and awareness to your podcast or to your video series rather than saying, hey, buy from us. They can be used within ABM campaigns, like I mentioned, reaching out to people and saying, hey, have you ever checked out our video series or our podcast? Hey, have you subscribed to our newsletter? And that newsletter is getting fueled by that podcast or video series. Hey, another email. Hey, would you be open to coming on or at least discussing, maybe making an appearance? There's just so many things in the marketing flywheel, if you will, that this one thing can fuel, and you really won't start to feel it until you do it. And then it really starts to get moving and you're like, wow, I can use this content in so many different places. It offers me the opportunity to communicate with people in my space. It helps me build the messaging for the way that we speak to people, whether that's on our homepage or in our email copy or ad copy or what have you. So I just think that, aside from, yes, it's a cool medium for content and for posting on social, there are deeper places within that marketing flywheel that this episodic content really can help.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because we do the same thing. I embed video clips into blog posts. Our BDRs and our AEs are sending clips from podcast episodes or quotes from podcast episodes in their outreach. Like it's not just a top of funnel play. It can easily be converted to bottom of funnel.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was just the last thing I wanted to say was, I know we touched on a lot and we get into detail on a lot of these things. They probably could all, and they very well may be, like individual episodes themselves that you can talk about how you can use a podcast within an ABM strategy, how you can use a podcast within your own media strategy for your entire business, how you can develop messaging based on talking to 10 ICPs and then taking those transcripts, truncating them down using tools like AI tools like ChatGPT and saying, hey, what are some of the common threads that you're seeing from these 10 different transcripts? I mean, there's so much that you can do, and it all just stems from talking to the people in your space. And then this is the thing that allows you to do it. It gives you the permission by saying not, hey, ICP, can I talk to you? It's, hey, ICP, would you like to make an appearance on Data Alchemy, Tech Qualified, whatever it may be? That's your opportunity to have these conversations with these folks. And that's where it stems from, is great conversations.
Yeah, agreed. It's the perfect excuse.
Yep, it really is.
All right. Well, I think that's a good spot to wrap up. Thanks, Justin, for sharing your knowledge. As always, this was a fun conversation. And thanks to everyone for tuning in to another episode of Tech Qualified, and we will see you next time.
All right. Thanks, Meredith.
Thanks for checking out Tech Qualified. This show is brought to you by New North, a marketing agency that helps turn your small, scrappy marketing team into a growth engine. To find out more about New North or check out more episodes of this show, go to newnorth.com/techqualified.